It's a jam-packed strategy episode. How to look for upside. What is the value of a multi-positional player? How to navigate fab. Plus, we'll preview some undervalued and overvalued players from the first two rounds of ADP. 2021 NFBC main event and auction championship winner Phil Dussault joins us to talk about a multitude of topics next on Beat the Shift. Welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How you doing, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing splendid here. Oh, wow. We are getting into all this preview here, starting to do the positions, starting to get projections, ATC projections out. Hope you've had a chance to sift through them. I've sifted through a little bit, if you can believe it. A lot more to do. But how are you doing, Ruvain? What's going on?
I'm doing great. I'm just trying to get ready for the baseball season. Actually, pitchers and catchers are supposed to report 23 days from this taping, so it's coming up. It's coming close.
Yeah, I can't wait. And we've got a very, very special guest on the show. He was the 2021 main event of the NFBC and auction championship winner. That's hard to do, but he did it. Phil Dussault, how are you? Am I pronouncing it correctly, by the way?
Yep, you're right on.
There you go. Welcome to the show, Phil. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm doing great. And we are having on Phil, who obviously knows how to win these very big contests, to help us with a lot of strategy. It's going to be pretty much an all-strategy episode today, and we'll do a lot of different topics. So let's get right into it. And let me just start by very, very generally throwing out the question, Phil. How should one prepare for a fantasy baseball draft? Not looking to give all your secrets away, but what's the general process that somebody should do if they want to up their game?
Yeah, so the way I do it isn't the way that most people should do it. I have some skills with Excel that not everyone has, so I don't recommend doing what I do if it's not your strength. For the average player, I'd say my best advice would be either use ATC or aggregate projections yourself if you want your own mix and whatnot. Then manually adjust playing time for hitters, and then spend the remaining time doing deep dives on as many pitchers as you have time to do. Especially probably start in round 3 or 4. I think that's where projections lack the most. And if you can spot an increase in velo, a pitch mix change, a new pitching coach that is working, a pitcher that went to drive line that you saw something and you feel good about him, just deep dives like that, 30 minutes for a pitcher, just looking for news, looking at his different pitches. He's going to try to use his curve, slider more, all that stuff. I think that's what projections miss the most. And if you have time to spend, that's where I'd spend it, and that's where you can gain an edge on the crowd.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that projections haven't done this yet, although I think they will soon. Is exactly what you said, is incorporate pitch mix change into their data. I remember a time where projections did not have velocity in them, and then someone spotted that, oh, wait a minute, velocity, that really is a good indicator of a good pitcher, and when you put it into your formulas on how to calculate strikeouts, oh my goodness, it correlates very well. I'm surprised it hasn't been done yet, and I think it will be soon because it's all componentized. Like we know what the rates are, we know what the pitching values are per pitch, and then it's just a question of what was their previous mix, and if you had to change it, in the future they're going to do this mix. It should be fairly easy to change. I haven't seen projections do that, but I kind of think it'll be. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's something I do in my model, so I think it's coming soon. If I was able to do it, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are smarter than me who can figure out as well.
Yep. And Ruvain, what about you? What is you think anything to add to the general way to prepare, and what other tools and resources do you use?
Well, I like to hear what the players have to say when they first report to spring training. I want to see how they're talking about what they did in the off season. If they lost weight, gained weight, if they're based on a pitcher or catcher, if they a pitcher or hitter, if they lost weight or gained weight. That's is a big difference with that. I'm going to look at the ADP. I'm going to see where the players are falling right now and see how my projections, the projections I use, such as ATC, if I use those projections, how they fall compared to what the ADP looks like. I'm also going to look for something a little bit people just don't look at this as much, but when players change positions or change their roles, like let's say a pitcher says they're going to be a reliever when they were a starter when they're a reliever, sometimes you can find a lot of hidden value there.
Exactly. Any to me, I think that I mean I'm a projections guy and I like to use projections. Any soft data that's not incorporated in projections that you know isn't, that's something that can add value. But I like Phil's idea of using ATC. That's kind of what I do also. Just curious, from your point of view, I know that you do your own system and you do your own projections, Phil. What percentage of NFBC high stakes guys you think either use ATC or look at it for a gut check?
I couldn't tell you. The people I talk to the most have a pretty high level of Excel skills, and I think they'd rather have more control, so they do the aggregation themselves, but it's pretty much the same thing you do. But I think everyone, at least for a gut check, does look at Fangraphs and looks at ATC and compares it to see if they're, because it's a really good. I mean, you've said it yourself over the past few years. You've seen that ADP and ATC get closer together. So I think that it's a way to gauge the market in a projection form, I'd say. I couldn't tell you how many people use it, but I think that at least in terms of comparing it to the market and see whether they're higher or lower on a player, I think a lot of people use it for that.
So, Phil, how have you changed the way that you've prepared for a draft in the past couple of seasons?
So since about 2019, that's when I spent all the time to build my formulas. So since then, the basic idea has been the same. Start with projections, as well as my own formulas, and then try to make improvements on those. Whether it's velo, whether it's pitch mix, all that stuff. And then, so the basis has been the same, but every year I look at the formulas, see what I can do to improve them. I get new data every year. I get an extra year of data every year, so I add that and see how that adjusts the formulas. So I think our processes are, we look at different things, but I think we both focus on improving the formulas every year, and that's what our process is.
Yeah, Ruven, have you done anything different in the past couple of years that's trending for you?
Yeah, I'm watching what the market does. I'm watching how people value certain players. Like 4 or 5 years ago, even 6 years ago, pitchers weren't valued as highly as they are now. And the last couple of years, last 2, 3 years, it's been relief pitchers. It's been the relief pitchers that have been really, really pushed up immensely in what's going on in the draft. And I think if you follow that, you can actually mold your model or basically help construct your team based on how the market is acting.
I haven't really done anything different from my process over any time. It's always about project players, find who's undervalued, see what kinds of positions are undervalued, see what statistics are undervalued, and go there. I mean, it's the same question every year. The answer might be different, right? In some years, I might say, oh, I think the ace starting pitchers at the top are the value. Oh, or the middle round closers. Oh, the middle catchers, the end catchers, whatever it is. It's a different answer every year, but it's the same process of doing your work, making sure you know what your projections are, what your values of players are, seeing what the market does, and finding. I mean, we call them hotspots on the show for a lot of players in the same place that could be value, but that's what it is. It's finding the spots. Changes every year, but the process of doing that to me has been the same. Phil, do you have what's called maybe like a do not draft list of where you take all your players and you say, all right, I like these, but I will not at no point ever draft these guys, or maybe you do a here's my 25% of the player pool, I'll only draft these guys and I'm not going to draft anybody. Or are you a guy to well, I'll draft any guy at the right spot. Like, what's the right method, and what do you do?
So I'll draft any guy at the right spot, except my rankings are so bold that I mean I know there's about half the player pool that I have no chance of getting. Like for example, right now, let's see what example. Like Michael Harris is my hitter number 41 right now. There's no way I'm getting him. That would mean I'd need him probably in the probably seventh round to start considering him. So, I mean, I have no interest in him. So, I mean, it's not technically a do not draft list, but he's so low in my rankings that I know I'll never get him. And he's an extreme example, but I'd say that's about true for about half the player pool. I'd say there might be maybe 25% are targets, another 25% are I'll consider at or below ADP, and then the rest is I need like a crazy drop to draft them.
Do you purposely stay away from injury-prone players, or you don't, or as long as you just go by your rankings and that's it?
I just go by my rankings, but I mean the injury risk is pretty baked in. At least I try to put in as much as I can. I mean, my playing time projection is an average of 4 or 5 different playing time from different projections. But then I have some adjustments that I make if the hitter ended the year injured, if he had a bunch of injuries the previous year, then he'll get some additional drops because there are things that I'm not sure are fully baked in the playing time projection. So there's things like that I add, which in the end mean I usually fade. I don't think I've ever drafted Buxton. He's the poster boy for that question, I guess. So I mean, I'll consider some guys, but I generally stay away from them.
By the way, speaking about Buxton, and we usually don't do news on this show, but the Twins just traded for Michael Taylor. What does that tell you about what they think about Buxton's injury risk?
I mean, it's Buxton insurance. We saw it last year. They used him at DH when they could. I think if they have Taylor in center, they'll put Buxton at DH as often as they can. He's an elite center fielder, but they'd rather have his bat in the lineup. So I think maybe half the game he plays will be in center field, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on how he's feeling. But they signed him to a decent contract, so I think they want to keep him healthy for as long as possible.
Yeah, insurance, I guess. That's the story. We talk a lot about risk on this show, and I wanted to get your take on what you do because you had Michael Taylor priced as you had Michael Harris priced as 41 or 43. I forget exactly what you said, but there obviously is something to him. Either you're projecting a true talent that's lower, or you're projecting a risk factor. Hey, he's a second-year player. How do you incorporate risk into your roster construction? Do you take players and then downgrade them because of risk? Do you say, all right, I don't want to take a certain injury type? Do you say, okay, I need to roster an injury, to roster a risky player, I need to get a discount? Like, how do you deal with risk when you're building your teams?
So it's all. I mean, my formula spits out one number. It's an SGP number. It puts together the projection, my formulas, all that stuff spits out one number. So that's really the number I look at. I have things like, for example, I added that last year. I call that the Leody Taveras rule, which basically any player whose value depends purely on or mostly on speed, but isn't very good, he'll get bumped down. Just because if they hit their say 40th percentile projection for a month, they're a kind of player that loses playing time really quickly. So that's the kind of thing that is hard to put in a projection because projections will say, well, he should, based on the current depth chart, get 500 plate appearances. Based on what he's done before, he should steal a ton of bases if he does get those 500 plate appearances. But when you step back and look at the skills of the player, what I'm focused on isn't the projection itself, it's my overall number. So there's things that I can include that in that overall number that projection makers can't do. So that's kind of thing I add in, and risk and injury risks fall in that category as well. So players that I don't know had missed, say, had, I don't know, 60 days on the IL the year before. I'm not sure that their playing time projections truly reflect that, so I'll add that into my number. In terms of roster construction, I do it more for the pitching staff. If I start my team and I have a DeGrom, then I have Kershaw later, and then I'm at a point where I'm looking at I don't know who's Severino, for example. I'll probably pass on him even if my number tells me that I have to draft him. So for my pitching staff, I'll try to factor in who I drafted before a little bit more. But other than that, that's about the only element of risk that I try to include more in my roster construction. Other than that, I just try to draft the top player on my list.
So it's funny you mentioned that if there's a one-dimensional player, one category player that isn't as good, you're going to drop him. That actually is calculated with the ATC projection with their risk metrics. The intra-projectional standard deviation, which is the dimension risk factor, is exactly that. It actually shows how one-dimensional a player is. When I calculate my values, I don't remove, but I take down some players who are one-dimensional. Players who get in every category, like Bo Bichette, he's going to have, now he's a high player, but I'm just giving an example of a guy who's a 5-category player. He's going to be spread out a lot so that, the value of him missing that one category doesn't affect his overall value as much. Seiya Suzuki comes up as another guy who's fantastic at being spread out categorically, so their value is spread out. That actually is a way you can do it, and I use to risk adjust. So I have a price for a player, but then I'll risk adjust and, based on their dimension, take them up or down.
Yep, so that's basically the same thing. I call it, I think I have in my spreadsheet, I called it balance of the different categories. And I find that those players are easier to replace in season. Like if you draft a Gene Segura who contributes a bit in every category, if he gets hurt 2 months in the season, you're looking for a replacement in FAB. He's not a player where you have to replace 30 stolen bases or 30 home runs.
Correct.
It's easier to replace those players who contribute a little bit everywhere because your team is usually more balanced at that point. And then
correct.
You can more easily find a replacement.
Yeah, and I call that categorical or profile risk. It's the risk of a player, an absence or an underperformance adversely affecting any category specifically, or his value goes kaput because of the one category. Let me go to Ruvain first for this question. We do a lot of auctions here, but in a snake draft, Ruvain, do you scope out the players that you're more likely to take later in the draft? And that will feed your early round decision. Meaning, let's say you envision you're looking at the 12th round, 13th round, you see, I think I'm going to take a corner infielder there. Well, that makes me less likely to take a corner infielder early on, even if it's the best player, because you can get somebody who you think is tremendous value there. Is that something you do? Or do you draft best player a whole way and, wherever the chips may fall?
Well, I try to do that because you want to have an idea of what your roster is going to look like toward the middle rounds, because usually it's the middle rounds where you want to try to take, if you're going to take a risk, I think that's probably the area to take it. But early on, you want to try to get a good base. So you have to know, okay, listen, I want a good hitter in the first round. I want either a good hitter or a pitcher in the second round, and then same thing and goes on. But last year in TGFBI, I did something, and I wasn't sure what to do with this, and I realized I spoke to you about this. I had no idea what to do. I picked Garrett Cole in the first round, so I had the pitcher. He fell to me. I liked where I got him, and then my idea was, okay, when it comes back, I want a guy with steals or I want a guy with a lot of power. But when it came back, I had another pitcher sitting out there that had one of the highest values out there. So I was tempted to go after the pitcher, even though I know I needed a hitter, because I knew that if I would take pocket aces, which I don't like, I've never done before, it sort of straps you for the rest of the draft. And you have to know that if you're going to deviate a little bit from your original plan, you have to have the whole plan set for the rest of the draft. Otherwise, you're going to be trying to chase stats the rest of the time. In the end, I ended up picking the pitcher, and I felt like for the whole season I was chasing hitting just because I had two top pitchers. Now it ended up working out okay. I mean, I finished in fourth in the league, so it wasn't that bad. But usually you have to scope out and you have to have an idea of what's coming up, what can fall into your lap, or what you can expect, and from that you just look at the ADP from prior drafts and you can see how that works.
Phil, what about you? Same question. Are you mapping your drafts backwards? Are you saying, well, later there's more plentiful middle infielders, so third baseman is not that plentiful in the middle. Push up Jose Ramirez and Machado and Devers and all that?
I don't like mapping out drafts too much. If in a main event, I might actually not even a main event in a last year my high stakes league was the Diamond. I'd planned the first 4 rounds and I was reaching on every single player just because they were huge targets and I wanted them. Other than that, I don't like mapping out because I feel like it ties me to a specific build. And I don't like that. I don't want to be at a point where the plan was to draft a certain player and then either he's gone or there's someone else that I like better that's there, and I'm just going back and forth between do I take the better player, do I take the player that I planned for? I'd rather just draft the best player. One thing I'll keep in mind, especially draft champions, is a little bit different. In Fab leagues, I feel like there's always players that are going to show up in Fab in the first couple of weeks that we didn't expect to play every day, but do play every day. So I feel like you can usually fill in at pretty much every position early in the year if you're aggressive enough. In draft champions, for example, this year it's a little bit different. The shortstop go early, and I know if I miss out on the shortstops in the first 10 rounds, it gets really tricky. Because there's so many elite ones, it means there's fewer that are going in that round, I don't know, 15 to 35 range, because there's fewer platoons, because there's so many elite ones. So that's pretty much the only scenario where, this year I'm keeping that in mind when I'm drafting. Other than that, I adjust my values based on position scarcity before. So if I feel that the third baseman a little bit weak, then I'll bump their values up. But once that's done, I just follow my values as much as possible.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference what format you're playing in, whether it's deep or shallow. In the shallower league,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, where there's more replacement on the wire, obviously it's a little bit different, than the deeper ones. I do look at later rounds. I like to find the hot spots. If I see that, there are 4 nicely priced first basemen compared to ADP going in the 12th and 13th and 14th rounds, I'll probably get, if there's 4 of them that are nicely priced, I'll probably get at least one at a nice price. So I don't want to pick 2 first basemen earlier, block my corner infield spot. So I do take that into consideration. I wouldn't pass over a very good value, but if things are somewhat equal, I will, look towards what I think is going to be available later on and have a plan. I don't have a hard plan, but I have a map of where I think hot pockets of value are either per position or per statistic even, and that would help me in some of the decisions early on. I generally want to build the roster early on to give me the most flexible way of building it later on. If I know that there isn't going to be steals available in a lot of rounds, in somewhere in the middle, I might want to focus more on steals earlier because I want to be able to pick whoever I want. I don't want to be pigeonholed in, oh my goodness, where's my speed? I got to get somebody. So it does pay to look at what's going on, but it's not 100% certain. One thing I definitely do look is that, if I'm in a spot and I'm deciding, all right, should I take the third baseman, should I take the shortstop? If there is only one more third baseman to take, Um, and then there's a huge drop in value. Right now, third base, after you get past some of the better ones, Arenado and Devers and whatnot, there's a nice drop. Shortstops, though, in the mid-early rounds, there are a lot of shortstops roughly worth the same amount. Because you can get one of those shortstops in the next couple of rounds where you can't get a third baseman in the next couple of rounds, you might want to jump and take the third baseman. And okay, I can pick the next shortstop. It's like a short version of a replacement level type draft where you say, all right, the difference between this and this is this. The difference between this and dropping down 3 positions in shortstop is this. Get the tightest one. I used to do this in football. I know the fantasy football. Tight ends. I mean, before everyone took Travis Kelce, this is like 4 years ago. I would always come up with, oh my goodness, Travis Kelce is a first-round player. The difference between him and the other tight ends are ridiculous, and that sort of thing works even in the first and second round. I found.
What about it depends also, I think, where you're drafting. I mean, if you're drafting in the middle of the draft as opposed to drafting at 14 or 15, I think if you're drafting, at 1, 2, or 14 or 15, you got to be careful. You got to be able to map it out a little because you can start to see trends in the draft and you can start to see what's going on. And you have to map out stuff because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. When you're in the middle, let's say you're at picks, between 6 and 10, it's not going to be that bad. But if you're at 14, 15, or 1 and 2 at a turn, you have to map out. Otherwise, you're just going to lose out, and you may end up reaching, but you still have to map out a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, Phil, put that to you. What does it matter to you in terms of what the plan is, and in terms of mapping out whether you're in the middle or on the ends, and do you have a preference as to where you like to be?
So one more thing I just want to add I will map out the saves. That is the one. I guess saves and speed. So I'm more about mapping out. Having a plan for categories as opposed to specific positions. But my rankings have been heavily tested. So I know, it's an ongoing process where I'll do mock drafts by looking at ADP. I'll make sure that my rankings fit ADP so I don't get caught off guard by all the third basemen in my rankings being way too low, and then I get to a point where I have to reach for them. In specific drafts, sometimes you can get surprised, but generally, once we have some good ADP, my rankings in terms of positions are pretty set. Even in terms of categories, I feel like I have the right balance. So I'll map out saves, though. I'll know I need my closer by whatever round, because after that I don't want those players in my closer one. And then in the early rounds I'll lean towards speed. And yeah, you're right. If you're on the ends, especially for saves, it's even more important. You can't just say, well, there's 6 guys I like. If you have a pick in the middle, if there's 6 guys you like, you can generally let them go by and grab the last one on the way back, which you can't do when you're at the ends. But when I find out my draft position, saves are usually the first thing I look at, are which closers are going to be available at the, say, 1, 2, the 3, 4, the 5, 6 turn. What do I like better? If I wait till the 5, 6 turn, do I have a backup plan that I can reach on if I have to? But I don't like what I meant to say when I said mapping out. Now there's people who look at the first 12 rounds and say, well, I have these 2 targets in round 5, these 2 in round 6, these 2 in round 7, and so on. I don't like being tied to a plan like that.
We're talking here with Phil Dussault, who was the 2021 main event and auction championship champion from the NFBC. And we're talking about strategy and a little bit about risk. And, I've noticed in the past couple of years, and it's getting progressively towards this trend, that more of the drafted value is being, for lack of a better term, I'll use an insurance term, seeded out. It's being, thrown out either because of injury or underperformance, and more waiver wire guys are coming in. And, so the draftable value is just going down compared to everything else. To me, that says that if you're taking picks in the first couple of rounds, let's call it top 3-4 rounds, I would be super conservative. Take players who absolutely will hold their value. Freddie Freeman, who is going late first round, early second round this year, to me, there's an argument that he should be picked in the middle of the first round or even higher because of his stability. We're pretty sure he's going to end up a top 25 hitter. He's done that 5 years in a row. There's only one other player who has been a top 25 player in the last 5 years, and that's Trey Turner. So if you're not taking Turner, Freeman is so super stable in terms of returning that value. And when people do projections and people use projections, we're not really looking at what has happened in the past couple of years. Who has been the guy who's earned it the most? You see Aaron Judge, and he just went off this past year. Oh, my God, he's a top 2-3 player. But he hasn't done this every single year. Freddie Freeman has shown this over the past 5 years. He's been healthy, but whatever you call it. Do you agree with that sentiment that you should be heavily weighing on your decisions early on to be super conservative and taking what you would deem as low-risk players who are going to hold their value above all else?
I think it's a great strategy. I don't use it personally. Maybe I should. I mean, I've had some struggles in the past few years with my early round picks, but it's. I don't have a good argument for it though, honestly, because I mean, the way you phrased it sounds like a great strategy. I just, I mean, if I look at some of my drafts the last 2 years, if I just gotten, I mean, par value or close to it for my first few rounds, I would have been in much better shape in some leagues. But I do kind of like, I know my numbers over a full season, a full roster of multiple teams, they will even out. So I'll take the players that the system likes, even if there's more risk. But I do a lot of high stakes leagues, so I do in the first 3 or 4 rounds I do differentiate a lot. Even if I love Trey Turner is not a good example because he's going too early, so it's hard to get more shares. Say I love Ohtani. I might get him in my high stakes league, but I won't get him in 2 main events in another league. So I try to spread the risk that way. So at the end, my portfolio might be, if I have 6 leagues, I'll have, I don't know, 20 different players in the first 4 rounds, and I feel good about that portfolio of 20 players who should, as a group, return more than their ADP.
It's a little bit different when you're playing a lot of leagues versus one league.
Definitely, yeah.
Right.
If I had a single main event and it's all I can afford every year, and I'm putting everything in that league, I mean, I'd lean a Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, who else? And Machado probably falls in that group. Devers as well is up there every year. So I'd lean towards guys like that, definitely.
Okay, that sounds good. Ruven, I'll put this to you. Are leagues won by taking risks early, taking risks middle, or late in drafts? And I guess the corollary to that is, when should you be tipping the scale from taking more conservative players to then taking more risky players in your mind?
I think your best. It depends what you're going for. If you're going for, let's say you're just going for an overall, then your profile should be a little bit more riskier than well, I'm a conservative player, but if you should be more risk, not worried about the risk. If you're not going for an overall, but you're going for a place, or you're trying just to win your division or win your league or something like that, then I'd say probably the middle to late rounds are probably best, because you want to get that base. The first couple rounds, you want to get that solid base that you can bank on, and then you hope to hit on a couple guys later on who will help other areas where you're not as strong. Like if you go into a draft and you say, okay, the shortstops are great. You mentioned Philly, that the shortstops are very good, but after a certain amount of time, the shortstops they start to drop off, and you don't want to be left without one of those top shortstops. But if you build a strong enough base, there's no reason why you can't take a risk on one of the lower shortstops that you hope will hit, that will make that jump from, let's say, from a 21 round, you drafting a 21 in the round 21 to, let's say, either a 15 round value. So something like that. I don't like taking it too early, because if you take it too early, it can hamstring you, and you can be out your team can be out of contention very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I've done studies as part of the ATC risk volatility metrics that, the players with the lower amount of parameter risk early on, more expensive players, tend to actually do better on average than the ones with high risk. At the bottom, though, the $1, $2 players, it's the opposite. That players who are a little bit more risky in the aggregate actually do better because they have more upside, and the downside's cut because, if you have a $2 player who underperforms, especially a hitter, you cut, right? Easy. They don't really affect your, pitchers are different because they can crash your ratios, but especially hitters, you just cut them. So you're realizing the upside and not much downside. It's just a cut. So there is a point where the answer is true. Phil, what is that for you? Do you think that leagues are won risks early, middle, late, and what level, what round, or what's your general sense of where you should be flipping from focusing on floor to focusing on ceiling?
So, I mean, the obvious answer is later risks make more sense. It depends on so many factors, though. It depends on league size, depends on, like Ruben said, if you're playing for the ball, it's different. Also depends on your skill level as a fantasy player. If I probably don't have to take as much risk as someone else when I'm playing fantasy baseball. In fantasy football, where I'm terrible, I'll take more risk because I need to hit on one of those risks to be able to beat the more skilled fantasy player. So it depends on that. It depends on the price point of the league. There's so many factors that go into that decision. I do believe every player has a price. You can be in a league where I know last year, before spring training, there were a lot of people fading DeGrom. I think his ADP was in draft champions in the early third round. But there were some drafts where everyone had their mind, I'm not touching DeGrom, I'm not touching him. Well, at some point, someone has to take him. So, I mean, in an overall competition, in, say, $150 DC, I probably would have, even though he was somewhat off my board, I would have considered him, say, the late third round. In a higher money league, that might change. One example I can talk of is in my Diamond League last year in the NFBC, which is $10,000. Luis Castillo and Zach Gallen were guys that I was trying to avoid. I mean, their ADP around that time was around 11. But before the injury doubts, there were two guys that I liked. So, and $10,000, obviously I don't want to draft an injury risk. And I'm like, I just hope someone else takes them. Castillo I took in round 13 and Gallen I took in round 17. And they're the reason I won that league. So, everyone has a price, even if you say these guys are off my board, at some point you have to weigh in the upside. And for me, that was those rounds, and it worked out. But it's a tough decision. Sometimes you just hope someone else takes the player, and you don't have to deal with it. And Buxton was kind of those guys. When those guys last year, when he was healthy in spring, we all knew the upside. And I was just hoping someone else takes him so I don't have to deal with the decision, because they're a really tough decision, especially in higher money leagues.
So what are the types of risks that you find have worked out better, and what are the types of risks that you find have not worked out? Like, what are the general? Is it, I don't know, catcher risks have worked out well, or pitcher risks, or old guy risks, or like, what class of risks you think have been better than expected and worse than expected?
I'd say we tend to overreact to the most recent news. So I think the risks that usually work are, I mean, the two guys I named, Castillo and Gallen, last year worked out. There was also Zach Wheeler, who was going in the late second round, I believe. Then there was some noise about an injury he had, I think, like 3 months before the season. He kind of just rested his arm, and then it was fine. But he was pitching in spring, or he was slightly behind, and I think he ended up missing 1 or 2 starts, but he was slipping a couple rounds because of that. So I think those are kind of the risks that, obviously, it sounds, everyone's scared of pitcher injuries, because if it could end, I mean, you can wake up one morning looking at Fangraphs or RotoWire, and you see he's out for the year. So with Tommy John. So they're the harder risks to make, but I do think that we tend to overreact to recent news.
I was going to say, Ruven, you're the injury guy. What's your take on drafting risky pitchers and risky players especially who are injured?
Well, you could say every pitcher is an injury risk. I mean, 48%, close to 48% of all pitchers went on the IL a couple of years ago. So it doesn't matter if the pitcher has a history of injury, where they throw 100 miles an hour, where they throw 90 miles an hour. It doesn't matter. All pitchers have this risk because your body's not supposed to throw a sphere for 100 times every 5 days from 90 feet and trying to pinpoint accuracy. It's not a normal thing for a body to do. I'd rather take risk in hitters with an injury risk because like what the Twins did, they just got Michael Taylor. So now I may be willing to go and have a few more shares of Byron Buxton because it looks like the Twins want to go the route like a Giancarlo Stanton, where have him DH more, play the outfield a little bit, and you know what? That will get him more at bats. You get him more at bats. That's what they need him for. They need him for his bat more than they need him for his glove. They just got a Gold Glove caliber or Gold Glove winner in Michael Taylor in center field. You do that. I mean, I can only see upside now in drafting a Byron Buxton, but Jacob deGrom. He pitched a month and a half last year, or 2 months total for the entire year. I mean, where he's going, I don't feel comfortable taking him. I mean, we had so many shares of him last year, but I mean, what we did was when we drafted him, we were nervous about him last year. This is before he actually went on the IL and he was pitching in spring training. We drafted him, but we also drafted his handcuff. We drafted Tyler McGill in a lot of those leagues also, just to be sure, just to be safe, because again, almost 1 out of 2 pitchers end up on the IL. So all pitchers have a risk to get hurt.
Yeah, but I like with deGrom last year. I know we had a lot of shares, but we didn't spend the first, second, third round. We spent $13 in an auctions on him. To me, that was well below the risk-adjusted price. That was worth it, and maybe the fault was taking too many shares of him, but definitely that price suggested it for us. Phil, anything to add to this?
No, I mean definitely for early rounds. I mean for guys that have never done it. I was kind of just referring to the overreaction we have, but a player that, for example, guys like DeGrom and Buxton that Reuven named, they're players that, like at this point in January, we already see them as injury risks. Whereas the guys that I was thinking about, the Castillo, the Gallen, and the Wheeler, at this point we thought they were healthy. Then we learned there might be a little bit of something, but there's usually a quick overreaction that it can be a good buying opportunity. But as a general rule, definitely hitters are. I mean, because if hitters are injured, it's usually a 6 to 8 weeks thing, for whether it's a hamstring or a hamate bone or whatever it may be. For pitchers, an arm injury can turn into Tommy John. It's a 0. So those are the ones you want to try to avoid as much as possible. But it's what most people try to do. So sometimes it can be a buying opportunity. But I think that's more true come the end of March, where we're overreacting to the news. Or if someone hits 2 home runs in spring training, his price goes up. So it's things like that we overreact to because it's all we have, and sometimes we can use that to our advantage.
A question to you, Phil, on starting pitchers that have some injury concerns or returning. So I've noticed that if you look at projections tend to be optimistic on the playing time for the pitchers. If you actually use Jacob deGrom, and ATC has him at 143 innings, maybe that's optimistic. Or if you use an auction calculator and you price deGrom, he will look and appear to be the number 1 or number 2 top pitcher to take. I don't think many people will be drafting him as number 1 or 2 top pitcher. I think people are going to assume some more limited innings or whatnot. Chris Sale at 134 innings. At that, he's going right now in the 12th round, but he's worth a couple rounds more if you look at projections. Take like Clayton Kershaw, ATC's projecting at 125 innings, also a bargain if you look at what his projection is. what do you do for those starting pitchers? Because I assume you don't just blindly take these projections, and even your own projections might be optimistic and say, whoa, all these injury risk pitchers that seem to be great bargains, so we got to grab them. Are you decreasing the innings and then pricing them? Are you saying, well, I see that, but I'm not going to do it? Like, how do you deal with the starting pitchers that have injury risks where the projections show that they would actually be a bargain compared to ADP?
For most of those guys, I do have a downgrade in my number based on the innings they pitched the previous year, the 2 previous seasons, whether it was an injury, all that stuff. So, yeah, I'll generally fade at least the early round ones. I mean, DeGrom, I don't expect to have any shares this year. But once you get to round 8, 10, it starts to get more interesting. I mean, Chris Sale is obviously a huge risk, but there's huge upside. And at that point in the draft, it could be worth it depending on your team build. It depends on the format. It depends on whether it's an overall. It depends on the entry fee, all that stuff. But if it's more likely that I have shares of Chris Sale this year than I have DeGrom.
That's a good take. What about you, Ruben? Anything to add?
No, I think we got this pretty well. That we're all knowing that these pitchers are going to get hurt, and that the risk is just, it's also a matter of the construct of your team. If you're going hitter heavy and you want to take that risk on those possible injured pitchers, or like Phil, you said about those whispers going on in spring training, go after those guys. But it's. I hate to say it, but injuries are a crapshoot. They're basically a crapshoot. I mean, especially for pitchers.
So one of my strengths when I'm playing League is the draft. That my valuation skills are good, projection skills, I guess, are good. I make my money by picking players well in the draft, and especially in an auction, just extracting the economics of the auction. I'm not saying that you're bad at it, but I think, Phil, and I think you'll agree that your waiver wire skills and your in-season play is really what makes you stand out. Do you agree with that, by the way? And do you think, in general, leagues are won at the draft or more won in season with the right picks?
So, it's obviously both. In season used to be my weakness, but it's become a strength. If I have a year like 2021 where I hit on players in the draft, guys like Robbie Ray, Logan Webb, Dylan Cease had on a lot of teams, if not all my teams, because they were late picks. If I hit on those, I'm very, very hard to beat. If I have a year like last year where I just mess up more picks than I should in the draft, then I grind in season and try to make it up. But one example, one of my main events last year, I finished in second place. I lost by half a point, the league. My draft started Luis Robert, Ozzy Albies, Freddie Peralta, Dylan Cease worked out, Aroldis Chapman, Jose Barrios. So that's 5 of my first 6 picks that are basically zeros. And I mean, the rest of the draft, I had some hits, but I mean, I still had, Santander was a hit, Zach Gallen worked out, Ahmed Rosario, Logan Gilbert, Tommy Edman. So I had some good picks, but I had some other bad ones, like Matt Bellinger on that team. I had Nick Pivetta, Miguel Sano. So it was like after that, I had some hits, but a lot of bad picks as well. So it's not one of those drafts where I made it up later. It was maybe slightly above average draft after round 6, but the 5 of the first 6 picks just killed me. But I made an fab on that team. I picked up Christian Walker in week 2. Overpaid for Drew Rasmussen. Well, overpaid compared to the runner-up bid, but it ended up being well worth it. And Cal Garali was another one of my pickups in that league. So I've become a much better in-season player. But, I mean, that skill is it's more replicable, I'd say. For the draft, I just hope that things work out this year and that my numbers work out better than they did last year. And I think if they do, I hope to have a good year.
Yeah, and I'll definitely say that I think as the years have gone on, I think that being good on the waiver wire has become more important. I think that because there's a lot of attrition, or as I say, seeded value, it does become more important to be there. And so, when you're trying to pick up players and you're doing your fab, and you spend a lot of time, I know, on Sunday and Saturday before the pickups to make sure you have whatever you want and to make sure your pickups are great. What do you look for when picking up the waiver wire? Are you looking for player upside, hot players? Are you looking to fill category needs? And then B, how do you decide who to drop, which is almost as, I'm not going to say more important, but it's pretty important knowing who to drop.
Yeah, I start with the drops. This actually wrote an article on the FTN Draft Guide where I kind of go through my process of figuring out drops. So if listeners want more detail, they can go look at that. I mean, as a general, just to summarize the article, I guess, I kind of break the season down in 3 tiers. The first part of the season where I think it's about being patient. I talk about with injuries, not overreacting to recent use. You don't want to overreact to a month of stats. First month, I'll look at playing time. But for pitchers, if there's a pitcher I loved in March, 2 bad starts aren't going to change that. And we saw that last year 2 years ago with Robbie Ray. His first couple of starts were terrible. And if you like them in March, don't change your mind because of a couple of bad starts. Once we get into, say, May to July, that's where mistakes are made, and I make them as well. It's so hard to decide if, trying to come up with a good example. No one comes to mind, but if a player you liked is out for 8 weeks. Actually, Danny Jansen was one of those guys last year. Guy I liked went on injured list early in the season. Then for a longer period of time in May. It's hard to decide what do you do with those guys. Do you hang on to them, eat the 0? Do you pick up a replacement, lose a bench spot? So it obviously depends on how many bench spots you have, if you have IL spots, and so on. But May to June is where May to July, is where mistakes are made and where you have to try and take advantage of other people's mistakes. That's where Drew Rasmussen I talked about was dropped in one of my leagues, and I overpaid for him because I loved him in draft season. Someone else didn't like his first 2 starts, and I try to pounce on that and take advantage of it. And then the last 2 months of the year is where just draft capital, what they've done for you so far in the season just doesn't matter. It's all about just taking, it becomes almost like a DFS where you try to maximize stats, you stream if you have to. If you don't think someone can help you for the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, don't be scared to drop him. If you have too many saves, it's time to drop. You can drop a closer, and so on. So that's where the grind comes in, and that's where I usually try to take advantage, where teams that might be out of it move on to football, where other owners aren't as active. So that's for the dropping part. In terms of every week, how I decide who to drop, I mean, I look at my roster. I have some formulas that tell me how I rank players rest of season, and I try to balance that with my projections for the upcoming week, whether it's my own or Rasball. So it's really it's a complex answer. It's a balancing game. I find that having friends to talk to is really helpful. Before you make a big drop, ask your friends who play the same game as you, am I crazy for wanting to drop this player? Talking things out, listening to podcasts, just grabbing information and trying to make the best decision. To go back to your question about whether I look for upside for prospects, I'm not a prospect guy, but I'll look at projections, see what they think for guys that were called up. I'll look at AAA stats and try to just blend all that together. It's kind of just, it comes from experience, trying to grab as much information as you can, put it all together, and try to make a decision from that. But it is hard, and it comes with experience. In my first few years of playing this game, I was terrible at it, but I've gotten a lot better.
Yeah, it also comes with putting in time.
Yeah,
time to
definitely.
evaluate the players. I was at First Pitch, Arizona, and I can't remember, maybe it was Steve Weimer or somebody who said that, you in the audience, you're just as good as me. As long as you put the time in. I put a lot of time in. If you put more time in me, then you'll be better than me. A lot of this is dissecting the information and really deciding in terms of who to drop. We have a motto on the show that if somebody's going to pick up the player that you drop, you probably shouldn't drop him. Now, not at the end of the season where we're talking about categorical things and crazy things happen, but in general for the first half of the season, if you think that somebody's going to instantly pick up somebody next week, probably shouldn't drop him. And of course, the circumstances, you've got too many injuries, but that's the general rule. And could you drop somebody? We also have another rule: is will I be using this player anytime soon in my lineup, or is he just going to ride on the bench? If he's going to ride on the bench, well, somebody to pick up on the waivers might be a better opportunity cost than the guy who's not going to even play, and vice versa. Anything to add, Ruvain?
Yeah, I think the first couple of months you have to try to see what you were deficient in after the draft. You look at your team after your draft. You say, okay, I need stolen bases, so maybe you look at a guy who's, again, this is exactly what Phil said, looking for playing time and how much playing time certain players are getting and we're supposed to get and they're actually getting. Because let's say you're light in stolen bases and you see a guy who's playing, you think is a stolen base guy and he's getting more playing time, then jump on that. If you think you're weak with saves and you see a guy who's getting more saves in a committee than the other people, then go jump on him. I think it's not as much as need as much as the first month or two, or even 2.5 months. You're trying to fill and fix what went wrong in the draft because nobody ever has a perfect draft. So you're trying to fix exactly what you think went wrong in the first in your draft, and then after that you can work on other stuff. If you want to, if someone drops a prospect because they need room on their roster because people can hold on to prospects. We held on to Trey Turner when he came up for almost 3.5 months, and he just sat on our bench and sat and sat and sat. And you kept asking me every week, "Are we dropping him?" I said, "No." Are we dropping him? No. Even though sometimes we needed a spot, sometimes those prospects that you draft and you want to hold on to, they're not worth the player that you're going to be picking up.
Phil, what do you do with closers in waiting, or maybe next of line closers? Because if you wait till somebody gets injured, then they're going to be $300 out of 1,000 on the waiver wire, and that's not really great. Ideally, you pick up the closer for $1 the week before, right? How do you detect who's going to be the next closer, and when do you know when to jump in before to get those guys?
So there's other people that are better at this than I am. In my mind, Mark Cerebro, a Hall of Famer in the NFBC, is, at least in my eye, from what I've seen, the fab pickups every week. He's one of those guys who just jumps in before everyone. It depends on. So in the NFBC, we have 7 bench spots. In 2021, when I had my great season, I was very lucky with injuries. And I could use most of my bench spots for either starters that I wanted to hold on, that I saw upside in, 1 or 2 hitters to stream, and then I had a couple spots for middle relievers like that I thought could become the closer. Last year was a totally different story. A lot of players I liked got hurt early in the year. Steven Matz was one of those. A bunch of catchers got hurt, and I was. My bench was filled with injured players, and I couldn't afford to take those chances, and that hurt me. So it depends what you have on your bench, but I'd say if every week, if you have a bench spot that you're not sure what to do with, find that 8th inning guy, either where the closer might have struggled in the previous couple of outings, or sometimes just take a chance if I don't know. It works better around the deadline when we know who might get traded. But speculating on Felix Bautista last year worked out great before the deadline. But even in May, if you have a roster spot you're not sure what to do with, pick up I don't know, AJ Minter. Maybe you can use him as a reliever if you need a guy you can plug in if you have bad starts, or maybe Kenley's going to get hurt that week. That was last year. Sorry, it's different this year. It might be John Schreiber or whoever else. But it's take a chance like that. Just don't keep a guy that you don't love on your bench. Take a chance on a middle reliever, and you might just get lucky once. It only takes once to get lucky, and you can end up with a closer for the rest of the year.
But by the way, do you learn in season from one league to the next? You know, something happened in your league, pickups or whatever, and you say, oh, and then you use that next week?
Um, Maybe in the NFBC is great I mean, you can have access to what everyone else did in all the other main events. So you have access to, I don't know, 46 other leagues, and you can see who the good players picked up. And it's something I'll keep an eye on. If I see, I mean, I mentioned Mark Cerebro. If I see him pick up a closer in waiting 1 week, um, the next week I might pick up that guy just because I know a good player like them. I know my strengths. Closers aren't necessarily my strengths, so I'll find someone who's better at it than I am and try to, I don't know, copy what they did. Doesn't always work out, but if I have an empty bench spot, like I said, it's one of those chances that could be worth doing. One thing I wanted to add when you're talking about drops, you can see it sometimes in the NFBC. I forgot how. I mean, Jeff Zimmerman has a name for it. I forgot what it is, but you'll see a player is 80% owned in the main events, which means he's owned in say 40 of the 50 main events, but in the other 10, no one bid on him. So that's usually a sign that if you're hanging on to one of those players, you might want to just reevaluate whether it's really worth holding on to him, because the odds are if you drop him, if no one picked him up in the other 10 leagues, odds are that in your league you can drop him and pick him back up a couple weeks later.
Yeah, that's great to use information there. And, going back to what you said earlier, the best things you can do for Fab is really just to talk to people you trust, people you know. I mean, even just, Ruve, you and I, we talk about our own leagues, but I use some of the ideas you have on some of my solo leagues. I'm sure you do the same on yours, right?
Of course I do, and I use my deeper leagues to help me with my shallower leagues, because you can catch a rising star in the deeper league quicker than you can in the shallower leagues because you're exposed to more information. The more information you have, you'll be able to pick up that deeper guy in a shallower league quicker because you had your eye on him in a deeper league.
Yeah. Phil, want to talk about multi-positional players. I don't know how prevalent it is this year compared to some of the other years, but there's a lot of players who are first base outfield eligible. They're second, third, short second. How valuable are these multi-positional players to you? Do you say, all right, well, they're a $7 player, but because they're multi-positional, and then I'm going to add $1 or $2? What do you do for them? And obviously, it depends what format. If you're in a best ball format, multi-positional player is worth a lot more because it'll automatically give you the credit for whatever position it is. In a Fab League, it's of value. It's not as big a value, but what do you do in terms of factoring that in, and what is the value of multi-positional players in your mind?
So last year there were so many of them that it wasn't. It was in 2021 there were a lot of them. So I mean, it was at a point where you didn't even have to push them up in your rankings, that you just happened to draft them because if you like the player more than other team, you throughout your draft you'd find 4 players that you liked more than others that happen to have multi-position. This year it's a different story. There's a lot fewer of them. I pushed them up. It depends on the position, anywhere between zero point 0.4 and 0.8 SGP. So when I look in terms of dollar value for top players, that's probably going to be, like you said, between $1 and $2. And I kind of drop that based on ADP, so a player in round 10 won't get as much of a boost. Just because at that point in round 10 there might be a 40% chance that the player is going to be off my team in July. So I don't want to give him as much of a boost for the multi-position. I generally try to be a little more aggressive with them than the market. If I get in a say 30 team 30 players out of 16 or 17 hitters I draft, I'll try to get 3 of them. It allows me to only have maybe 1 or 2 hitters on the bench and cover every position with my multi-position guys. In Fab Leagues, that's kind of the goal for me.
Yeah, I think for me, the value in a Fab League is where, if you have a guy who's eligible second, third, and for some reason, your second baseman gets injured, well, because you have a second, third eligible guy, now the player pool that you're looking for to replace the guy expands, right? You're not just looking for the second guy. Now you're looking for either second or third. So it gives you more access to the players, and obviously that replacement level goes down a little bit, right? So because a replacement level on the waiver wire goes down, it means your overall boost. So when I'm calculating my auction Z scores, I factor that in. I look at what the difference in the waiver wire would be between, second, third, or first outfield, whatever the combo is, and it gets a little bit of a bump for those positional players because I know I'll be able to expand my horizon. It's not a huge bump. We're talking like $1 or $2, but, hey, it's factored in. Just, whatever it is, it makes a little bit difference. For most people, if it's a coin flip, then take the multi-positional guys. It's not a huge difference, but there you go.
And I also think that it matters when they're taking in the draft, because early on in the draft, those players, it doesn't matter if they're multi-position or not, their value is high. But toward the middle to the end of the draft, when you want to make sure you have those utility guys where you can throw in case there's an injury here and there, I think those, like the middle rounds and the late rounds, those, when they're multi-position, they increase in value only because the top guys, they're going to have their value no matter what. It's the middle to late rounds where they gain a little bit more than multi-positional early round.
Yeah, if you have a catcher outfield eligible guy, I mean, it doesn't really matter. 2-catcher league, you're never playing him in the outfield. That you can throw away. But, you get the idea. It always depends. I do want to ask you, Phil, about streaming pitchers. I have noticed, and you could tell me if you agree or not, that the streaming pitcher strategy, which I used to use all the time, does not work as well as it used to be. I found that the players on the wire who you think is, look at that matchup coming up, it looks juicy. No. I mean, in fact, it's become almost a verb in fantasy baseball speak. You've gotten Gombered. You've gotten Fettied. You name the guy that everyone keeps picking up because they think it's a good matchup. Oh, wow, look at that. They're playing that team. And it's a crash. And I've noticed that it just doesn't work as well as it used to be, especially early on in the season. You're just not sure what the good teams are going to be. You're not sure how the pitcher is going to be. So streaming, especially early, just doesn't work. Do you agree with that? And is that a reason, do you think, going into 2023 to shore up pitching earlier than you think? So instead of relying on the $3 and $2 and $1 pitchers at the end to fill out your number 6 and 7 spots, maybe just make sure that all your pitchers are $5 and above, and try not to actually stream at all. And if you have to, put a middle reliever or something, but don't put those streamers in. What are your thoughts about streaming going into next year?
I mean, the ultimate goal is to be able to stream pitches from your own bench, where you have enough depth that you can play matchups from your bench and you don't have to pick up guys in Fab. It depends on league type. It depends on the ball. I think last year it was a little bit more doable than it was in 2021, just because that mediocre pitcher that is available in, half the leagues in Fab. I mean, back in 2018, that guy used to go 5 and a third, qualify for the win. Offense was lower, so you could usually get a 4.5 ERA kind of guy. As teams have moved towards using relievers a little bit more, that 5 innings is slowly becoming 4 2/3, 4 1/3, and the juicier the ball, the shorter the outings and the more damage on the ratios. Last year with the dead end ball, it might have been a little bit more doable. but just because we're in a trend where relievers are being used more and more, I think we're approaching a point where even the ball can't save the streamers. Um, so, I mean, the ideal scenario is not to use them at all, but you can have. I mean, I had a bunch of pitching injuries last year, and yes, I tried to use middle relievers at times, but there's some point where you need volume, and if you see a JP Sears who has two good matchups, you take a chance and you cross your fingers.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, you have injuries, and this is what's left, and here you go. And I need the win, so probably not. But what the heck, he's gonna get more wins than my middle reliever, of course. We understand that.
And I
But
don't think
yeah,
I think right now, I mean, there's no one who goes into. I mean, it's even the same thing. We say streaming hitters is easier, but you shouldn't go into a draft saying I'm gonna stream hitters, I'm gonna stream pitching. I think no one does that. It ends up being a backup plan, and if you miss on some picks, if you get injuries, then you try to make the best decision you can based on categories. You just don't overreact and pick up a streamer in May because you think you need strikeouts. Sometimes it's just worth being patient and saying, I got starters coming back. I'll put him into relievers, not kill my ratios, and then I'll make a move later in the summer.
but what you can do in a draft though is you can say, you know what? If I have $1 players, make them all hitters. Or in the draft way, all right, rounds 19 through 23 are all going to be hitters. I'm not going to draft a single pitcher past round 18 or whatever. You could distribute your selections so that you end with the pitching earlier than you would the hitting, and say, all right, if I have to stream anything, let it be the hitters, not the pitchers. You could theoretically do that.
No, you're right. I mean, if I know for me, I'm better at streaming, and I think for most people, the same thing. I'm better at streaming hitters than I am pitchers. So I know I'll put myself in a position at the draft that the most likely scenario is that I have to stream hitters over pitchers. But I mean, obviously, the goal is to hit on everyone and not have to stream anything. And
Right.
I had some teams in 2021 that worked out that way. So that's the ultimate goal. But I think the number one goal is try not to stream pitchers, and then after that, it's hitters.
Any other take, Ruvain? Agree, disagree, anything to add?
Yeah, why not try to stream in the beginning of the year? Stream middle relievers, because middle relievers, especially quality ones, they'll help your ratios, and they may turn out to be a Spencer Strider, they may turn out to be a Jeffrey Springs, or like the year before, they may turn out to be a Ranger Suarez or a Justin Steele, who started out as middle relievers, did so well that they got boosted into the starting rotation, or they got more playing time, or they can even become a closer. So I think in the beginning of the season, when there's more questions as to how long pitchers are going to go, and how long a leash the managers are going to give these pitchers, it's a matter of trying to maintain your ratios, because it's very hard to come back when you're throwing out just 2-star pitchers early on and streaming, and they're all bombing. Maybe 1 or 2 hit, but a couple bomb, and they don't really always even out that way. So I think maybe we should try streaming middle relievers early on, and you can stream the starters later on when you have a better idea of how many innings these pitchers are going to go.
So let's end off this episode with a little bit of first and second round. We know Phil plays a lot of high stakes, so we're not going to really pressure him to give us his sneaky sleeper picks in the 15th round. But I think, Phil, you'd be comfortable talking with about the first and second rounds, and maybe some players that you'll have more shares of and less shares of. Do I have that correct, Phil?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right, good. But before we do that, it's late in the episode, but it's time for the Injury Guru's Trivia of the Week.
So now we're going to talk about the first 2 rounds of the draft, and my trivia is going to be based on the last 2 years, 2021 and 2022. 5 players in 2021 and 2022 were all drafted in the top 2 rounds and returned either first or second round value in a 5x5. Who are they? 5 players that both were drafted in the first 2 rounds in both 2021 and 2022 returned first or second round value in a 5x5. Who are they? A few of them were mentioned already in the episode, but let's see if we can get the rest.
Freddie Freeman?
Freddie Freeman's one.
Jose Ramirez?
Jose Ramirez another.
Trey Turner.
Trey Turner's there.
Mookie Betts.
Mookie Betts is not there. No.
No.
The answer is
Vlad?
no, but his teammate Bo Bichette.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was about the same. I wasn't sure about 2021. Was it? It's 2020 they got hurt, right? It wasn't 2021.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and we're missing one more. He was mentioned in this episode already.
Hitter?
That's who?
A hitter?
Yes, a hitter. A hitter. No pitchers who were drafted in the first 2 rounds in both years returned value of first round or second round.
Is it Machado?
Yes, it is. Manny
Yeah.
Machado. So those top 5, we're talking about how uber safe these guys are and how safe and how consistent they are. So those 5 guys have been drafted, and they're still being drafted like that in the first 2 or close to it, first 2 rounds returning first or second round value. So, Phil, who do you think is currently being drafted in the first 2 rounds that are overvalued?
I talked about Michael Harris earlier, so I won't name him again. For me, I want to say Juan Soto, and it kind of goes to one of the questions that you had, but we didn't get to. Players that tend to be overvalued, I'd say players that are great in real life, but aren't necessarily good fantasy players. Our game, the 5x5 game, doesn't reflect real baseball. And I think sometimes we get influenced by that. And I think Soto is a perfect example. He's a great hitter, but he walks a lot. Walks aren't good in fantasy unless you're a stolen base guy, which Soto isn't. And even if he hits 290, because of the amount of walks, his at bats are lower, and he won't contribute as much in terms of SGP in terms of average than someone who might hit 275 or 270, who gets more at bats. So he's one guy that I'm fading. I think I got one share in a Gladiator draft in the middle of the second round because he really slipped. But that's probably the only share that I'll have.
Ruben, why don't you go first? I'll wrap it up after.
Okay, I have 2 players that I think are being overdrafted a little bit. Julio Rodriguez, where he's going, I think he's being overdrafted. He is a great player. He is a 5-tool player. He is one of the best players in the Rising Stars in baseball, but you're paying for what he possibly could be and what he did at the end of last year. It's very hard for him to keep that up. Same thing with Aaron Judge. I think Aaron Judge is being drafted a little bit too high, and he's being overvalued just because of what he did last year. He had a career season. He had a season for the ages. He's not going. It's hard to imagine a player doing that for 2 straight years. There's no such thing as a Barry Bonds anymore. I don't think. But I think I'm not saying Aaron Judge is not a great player, but I don't think you're going to get the value at him at the pick number 5.
I think there's a bigger case for Julio Rodriguez to stay where he is because of the steals. And I think that if anything stays, it is the steals. And since it's still scarce, and I think he has enough of everything else, I think there is a case. I'll give you 3 players, 2 pitchers and a hitter. Or actually, I should say 2 pitchers and then 1 person who's both. Well, that would be Shohei Ohtani. I think that Shohei Ohtani has more risk than most people think, because he's doubly exposed. Whether you like it or not, people get injured in baseball, and at a higher rate than normally. He is exposed both on the hitting side, albeit on a DH, okay, but he's also exposed on the pitching side. If he's injured as a pitcher, that means he's also injured as the hitter, and they're not independent of each other. So I kind of think that there's a little bit of risk. Plus, you're going to be clogging up your utility spot if you draft him as well. Not that that's a bad thing to do, but it makes it a little bit less flexible for your roster, and you're not really getting a discount to roster him. So I don't like him in the first round. And the 2 pitchers, Jacob deGrom, I cannot fathom why he is not being discounted more, why he's being taken in the second round with that kind of risk. I just don't get it. And Sandy Alcantara, I don't even have him in my top 10 of pitchers. I know he had a great year, but he doesn't strike out that great a rate. His value is in the volume. I mean, he's on the Marlins. I don't know how good a team will be, so wins. I mean, he does pitch late into games. That helps him, but he'd be even better on a better team. So I just don't think that he's properly valued. I'm okay with waiting with, Aaron Nola, even Brandon Woodruff, any one of those guys. I'd even take a gamble on Spencer Strider over Alcantara this year. Anybody agree, disagree with any of our other picks?
I had a question about Ohtani. How do you factor in? The Angels said that they will use a modified 6-man rotation, so Ohtani's going to pitch every 6 days, which basically means last year, if they had a day off, they just keep going to 6-man rotation. This year, and they actually did that in September last year, if they have a day off, Ohtani gets pushed up. So per my math, if all goes well, he could end up with about 30 games. How do you factor? I mean, the way I've kind of put it quickly together, you could start Ohtani. He's probably gonna get, if all goes according to plan, you get 2 or 3 2-start weeks. You'll get I'm talking NFBC, the short week to start the year, and then short week at the All-Star break. So you basically get 8 starts from Ohtani and about 80% of his hitting stats. Do you factor that in? Does that push him up for you? I get what you're saying about the injury risk, but that part of it isn't factored in the projections. I was just curious what you thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, up to now, and I haven't really thought about it too much. I evaluate him right now separately as here's the full hitter player, here's the full pitcher player, and of course, you need to come up with the percentage of time. Like if you're in a daily league, you're getting 100% of his pitching starts, and you're getting 4/5 or even more of his hitting starts, right? Like that's the math. I haven't really factored into it in a weekly league. I've just assumed that he's Ohtani the hitter. Because always, right up to now, other than the 2-3 weeks that I'm going to use him as a pitcher for the short week or whatever, he's a hitter. So I haven't really contemplated. I'll believe it when I see it that he's going to be used that way. I don't know that I actually want to press the button and say, okay, no, I got to factor in 8 starts yet. But in any case, he's. Yeah, I guess if he's pitching, 2-start weeks, obviously he's the right play. I haven't really factored that in, but yeah, you would do the math in that kind of way, exactly as you described it. Yes,
I was mostly off of him. I used to, at least last year, I kind of balanced out the UT only with the couple of pitching starts that you get. But last year in September, they did that a couple of times. On it, I think when they had a new manager. That's kind of when they started it. If they had an off day, Ohtani would get pushed up. So at that point, it becomes more interesting because he does get more 2-star weeks that way. So it's something to pay attention to. I don't know if I'll be in on him this year or not. Haven't fully decided because, like you said, it's hard to put it all together with the higher injury risk, the pitching starts, all that stuff. But I do think he's more intriguing this year than he was last year because of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I agree. Let's end off with who is somebody drafted in the first 2 rounds that might even be undervalued for where they are. I'll start with Ruvain on this.
Undervalued. That's a little bit tougher because these are all top values to begin with. Undervalued. I see right now the ADP. Garrett Cole's at 19. I mean, he was going in the first round last year. People were concerned about it giving up a lot of home runs. He did pitch with a 3.5 ERA, but he also had 257 strikeouts. And he pitched 200 innings. That's hard to get. That's a workhorse. Now, I think he's a little bit undervalued because, he's going first round. Is he a second round value? He could be a first round value. He could have that value. And as for a hitter, again, we mentioned him before. Freddie Freeman, I don't know why he's not going in the middle of the first round. He always goes at the end of the first round. That whole turn right there, if you look at the ADP according to NFBC right now, the turn is Freeman, Machado, Bichette. Those 3 guys have all at 13, 14, 15 right now. It's the ADP according to NFBC. Those three guys are three of the five guys who've returned first or second round value the last 5 years. Last 2 years. Why would you not want to pick them sooner? I mean, those are almost quote unquote as guarantees as you're going to get. They've all been through some, nicks and dings, and yes, you have to, be concerned about injuries and stuff like that. But I mean, these guys, they're so consistent. Why would you not want to have them on your roster?
Yeah, well, you know my feeling about Freeman. And Bichette is right there. I think that what Bichette showed at the end of the year last year is actually more indicative of what his value is. I'm looking at him all through the previous year, and like that guy should be hitting more homers. That guy has such a low slugging for what he should be able to do, and then boom, he did that at the end of the year. I kind of think Bichette is undervalued. If you remember, he was being drafted like top 5 last year, and now all of a sudden it's late first round. Not much has changed in his profile. In fact, the Blue Jays probably got better in terms of their offense, even. So there's an argument for them there. And, you mentioned Cole, but I think Corbin Burnes deserves a first-round pick. He is just super solid. To me, there aren't that many top aces that I'm like, okay, well, he's an obvious ace. I think the uniqueness of being that pitcher does make him worthy of being taken slightly earlier than he is right now. I mean, if you didn't pick Machado, you can get Devers and be okay. If you didn't pick Freeman, I guess you can get Alonso, or instead of Vlad, you can get Alonso, maybe a little bit more comparable in terms of makeup. But Burnes, to me, is more of a rock than you think, and I would say probably him. Anyone to add, Phil?
I mean, the guy I had my eye on was Cole. I've always been interested in Garrett Cole. I've drafted him a lot. And where he's going right now in the earliest. I mean, that's going to change once we get into March in the main event season in the NFBC. But for me, he stands out over Burnes. I had Burnes on a team last year, and I don't know if everyone remembers that, but there was a point in late August, early September where we'd consider benching Burnes. He was struggling. I know he kind of got better at the end of the year, but I haven't really forgotten that, and I think Cole just stands out for me in terms of being safe, being reliable, in terms of also the schedule changing is going to make his life a little bit easier in the AL East, fewer in division games. So for me, he stands out over Burnes by quite a bit. So when you stand out, despite all the pitchers being being closer together and having a large group from rounds, I don't know, 3 to 6 or 7, when you stand out, at least for me, as the number one pitcher, you should be going in the first round.
All right. Yeah, I have him a little bit closer. I think there's some flaws in Cole, but yeah, he's also super reliable. The strikeouts are there. Whether he gives up some home runs again, whether the MLB tosses some balls to the Yankees that make Judge hit homers, who knows? But I wouldn't put it past them, I'll tell you that. But there you go. I'll throw in Tatis. I think Tatis also could be overvalued, not undervalued, overvalued. That guy is so risky. Who knows? I mean, we've seen what happens when he plays, but will he play? Will he go on another motorcycle expedition, and will he go skydiving and end up in another cast? And is his wrist really healed? Is his shoulder really healed? I'm going to say no on both accounts. I mean, Ruven, you're the injury guy. Is Tatis, you agree that he's overvalued? He's got more health risks than you think?
He does, but he's also had this is a long time he's been out now. He hasn't faced actual major league pitching in a very long time. The wrist has probably healed by now. Usually after surgery, after a couple months, he should be fine. Shoulder's a different issue because a shoulder subluxation like he had, that can pop out again at any time. There's what's holding it in right now, besides what's left of the tendons and ligaments in there, is a lot of scar tissue. If that scar tissue breaks, he can have another shoulder dislocation, have another issue, but he's not going to be playing shortstop. They're going to keep him in the outfield. He'll play some DH, so they're going to try to keep him as healthy as possible. So I don't think he's that big of an injury risk, but the way he plays puts him at an injury risk.
Ruven, you have any injury news tonight?
Actually, yes, I do. A couple of players. First of all, we mentioned the first 2 rounds of players, so I'm going to talk about Ronald Acuna. He said, I'm feeling 100% and I'm ready to go back to normal. I definitely don't want to DH anymore. That being said, he's planning this is from the most recent. He's planning on playing in the World Baseball Classic, but I think the Braves want him to DH only then, just because it's the beginning of spring training, and they wanted to make sure that he's okay with that. Former second or first round player Trevor Story had internal bracing procedure on his UCL in the right elbow. He's going to open the season obviously on the IL. The Red Sox had their conference for all the season ticket holders. He was there wearing his brace. July or August is probably when he's going to come back. That's what the Red Sox say. The Red Sox also said don't expect to get much out of him. But then Trevor Story said that he expects to play this year and he expects to get supposed to get some out of him. And one more player that may be off of people's radar just a little bit, and that's Max Meyer. Max Meyer will start getting ready to throw in a couple of weeks. He had Tommy John surgery in August. If you're in a keeper league and people dropped him because they're nervous about him, or you have a large bench or you have IL spots, he's the guy you may want to pick up. You may be able to get him, and he may have some value toward the end of the season.
Well, Phil, this has been a really large episode with so many great topics that we've really talked about, from the drafting into the waiver wire to risk. So a lot of great stuff. Thank you so much for joining the program. And before we let you go, why don't you tell us where we can see some of the stuff that you've done and what's in store for you in the next little while.
You can find me on Twitter at Phil Dussault 27. I wrote an article for the FTN draft guide that I mentioned earlier. It's a paid subscription, but it's well worth it. You'll get Vlad's Fab Whisper article all season long. So a lot of people that play, pretty much everyone who plays NFBC pays for that. It's well worth it, just to get a gauge on the market and 90 of Vlad's recommendations every week. So if you're going to pay for that in season, might as well pay early and get the draft guide and look at all the articles in there. And other than that, I'll be drafting from now until March, and I'll be in Vegas with the NFBC. So if anyone's listening who's going to be there, come say hi.
Phil, did we ever draft in a league together? I felt like we did in New York once.
I don't believe we did. I went to New York one year in 2019.
Did I help out Jeff Zimmerman in one draft and you were there?
You might have.
Am I making this up?
I did have I was in Jeff's main event in 2019.
You were?
Yeah, I was.
All right,
so
that
could have been it. Yeah.
So then I was there. So there you go.
But I was quiet at that time. I think I just signed up for Twitter. I wasn't doing any podcasts. No one knew who I was, and I wasn't really involved in the community. So I probably didn't even know who you were at that time either. I didn't know anyone. So.
Well, there you go.
Well, if you're in the draft room, you can't miss them. So yeah.
Yeah.
Can't miss who?
You.
Oh.
Ariel.
Why is that?
Why is that? If anyone wants to see it, they should come in New York on that Friday when we're drafting. You'll see how Ariel takes over a room when he drafts.
Oh, auction, yeah. Well, there I was helping out Jeff in a snake draft, so I was pretty quiet. But yeah, in an auction, I'm pretty loud. not in a nasty way. I just you'll notice my presence there in a very soothing, hypnotic way. Let's put it that way. Ruvain, how about you? What about your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, during season, off season, all season. You can also catch my weekly article on Rotoballer that comes out on Saturday or Sunday, depending, and that will help you with your fab for the following week.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen, and you can find me on Twitter at ATCNY. Hey, you can also follow the ATC Projections at ATC Projections. That's easy to remember, and of course, you can follow the Beat the Shift podcast at beat_shift_pod. My work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, and the ATC Projections are on those sites, plus at Sportsline in a nice Google Sheets. So go check that out. And, of course, you can listen to us each week on the Beat the Shift podcast right here. You'll notice this week we'll be doubling up episodes. We'll have a bunch of weeks doubled up to get you ready for draft season 2023. All right, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Phil Dussault for coming on the show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.